Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryanto Demand. I'm Olivia Quay. Coming up on the show, we look at the food delivery sector in a time of COVID-19. Demand has increased by up to 30%, yet delivery riders are concerned about their earnings. Our colleague Toh Ting Wei will tell us more.
We also check in with our China Bureau Chief and schools in Beijing partially reopen. Now, before we get to our stories, if you are new to this channel, do tap on the red subscribe button down below. First up, Singapore reported 799 new COVID-19 cases as of noon today. The vast majority of the new cases are foreign workers living in dormitories.
14 cases are Singaporeans and permanent residents. The total number of cases here now stands at 14,423.
Now, meanwhile, a Singaporean man was charged in court today after he allegedly posted false information about the circuit breaker measures. 40-year-old Kenneth Lai Yong Hui allegedly said on Facebook group Taxi Uncle that he had intel on extended measures Singapore would take, which was untrue. Lai intends to plead guilty and will be back in court on May 27th.
Well, let's turn our attention to the food delivery sector. According to Enterprise Singapore, the Land Transport Authority and Singapore Food Agency, demand for food delivery services has increased by up to 30% since the ban on dining in kicked in on April the 7th.
Customers, delivery riders and F&B operators more are hopping on the food delivery bandwagon. But some riders told journalist Toh Ting Wei that their earnings have dropped despite the added business. Let's get Ting Wei in on this discussion. Now, Ting Wei, in a story over the weekend, you wrote that some riders' earnings have dipped by 60%. Is it a result of demand not meeting supply?
Yeah, I think that's the main problem because I think we all would expect the demand to go up during this time. And I think it definitely has gone up. But the main issue is a kind of an oversupply of delivery personnel. So a lot of riders have talked about this MOT policy of letting private hire drivers and taxi drivers to join the food delivery scene and like parcel delivery scene temporarily. So for this, he has added quite a number of like riders. So in terms of like Grab itself, they say thousands have signed up to do Grab food delivery for private hire drivers. So you are looking at thousands there alone. And then so they will kind of increase the supply by quite a bit. And on the other hand, even for those who are riding bicycles and motorbikes, there are quite a number joining as well because I mean there have been people whose jobs maybe they have lost their jobs or they are freelancers without any maybe projects now, or even people on no pay leave. So some of the riders have thought about these people joining the food delivery scene. So there's quite a surge in the number of people joining. And on the other hand, there's also the issue of because like now there are more orders, but then I mean the restaurants can only move so fast. So the way some of them have thought about the waiting time increasing at this point as well. So like when to pick up an order, maybe they would need just 10 or 15 minutes last time for the restaurant to get it ready, but now they need maybe 40 minutes or something like in different cases. And the last point is like when you have stores, because like quite interestingly, some of them mentioned how McDonald's was quite a big source of orders from them. So when McDonald's had to close, the number of orders had anecdotally dropped. And then for bubble tea and other food, maybe like cakes, all this, they also contribute to some number of orders. So when these stores close, the number of orders get affected as well. So demand is growing, but not as at a fast rate as the supply is growing.
Right. Well, Ting Wei, it sounds like this is happening across the board, or do you think it's just hitting the riders who choose to work less hours for safe distancing reasons?
So for this, I've asked the major food delivery companies about it. So for them, they didn't really say there was a noticeable drop in the income of the riders. So like, so they said they don't see that. But for the riders I've talked to and the group chats that I'm monitoring, it seems like it's quite across the board that the income is dropping. So the range of how the income drop is different. So sometimes like some riders told me 20%, then after that, another rider told me like even up to 70%.
Wow.
So all this, I think it depends on the area they are working in. So I imagine like for different areas, there's also a different impact. And also I guess like on the flip side, if you look at it for the private hire drivers and the taxi drivers, their income previously during the COVID crisis was almost nil because nobody were taking the cars and stuff. But then for some of them who have gone to food delivery, I've talked to them and they have said like how now they are able to cover their costs and stuff. So I think it's kind of a two-way thing. Like some people lose, but then on the other hand, for the drivers, it's quite important for them to cover their costs in this period as well.
All right. Thui, just for context, how
Hmm.
much of a boom has the food delivery sector seen in this COVID-19 time?
So I think across the board in terms of the riders joining and in terms of the F&B outlets joining the platform, we have seen an increase. So as you can see on the screen now for GrabFood, there's a 80% increase in weekly applications for people trying to become delivery riders since March, and Deliveroo has had the same number. So, and Deliveroo has come out to say that they expect to get another 2,000 more riders by the end of June. But one thing to note, these numbers, I mean, they seem quite big, but then again, for the riders, they are not exclusive to one platform. And most of them, they don't really just sign up for one platform, they sign up for like 3 platforms. So I think the actual number might be a bit lower, but it's still an increase. And for the restaurants, since January, so there's been two spikes in the numbers. First time is that after the COVID outbreak, more restaurants started joining all these food delivery platforms. And in April, after the government announced the circuit breaker measures and the ban on dining in, there was another spike then. So I think the spike was quite big because restaurants now, they don't really have a takeout option. They have to turn to food delivery.
Well, Ting Wei, you also spoke to infectious diseases specialist Dr. Leong Ho Nam, who has been on the show a few times, and he considers delivery riders to be frontline workers as well. So, are there measures in place to ensure that this group doesn't become a weak link in our fight against COVID-19?
So I think the main measure that the delivery operators across the board have taken up now is the using of contactless delivery. It basically just means that the rider hands over the food to the customer without directly interacting with the customer. So like different operators have slightly different variations. But let's say when we talk about Deliveroo, for example, their guideline is that maybe they can put the food bag 2 meters away from them in front of the house, and then the customer comes out to take the food, and then after that the delivery rider go and take the food afterwards. So for this, Dr. Leong has said that it will help in terms of reducing the chances of spreading. So that's the main precaution. And we have other precautions that apply to, say, the rest of Singapore. Compulsory to wear masks, sanitize hand regularly, declaring their temperature. So it's not fail-proof in the sense that, like, even though they have to declare their temperature, I mean, like, it's quite hard to enforce it's quite hard to enforce it in the sense that, I mean, they can declare their temperature without having to have someone look at the temperature to verify it's real. But then I think I would like to think most of them are quite responsible about it as well, because for them it's their livelihood. And as one rider mentioned, they don't really want to do anything that will affect their job, because I mean, like, for some food delivery riders, like if you suddenly have a group of food delivery riders who were sick and the news came out, people will be afraid to order food delivery as well. So I think for the riders, most of them do recognize that it's kind of their responsibility and it's their livelihood to protect. So I think most of them do abide by these measures.
That's a good point, Ting Wei. We've been speaking to the Straits Times journalist Toh Ting Wei on the food delivery industry in a time of COVID-19. Although it's experiencing a boom in business, individual riders aren't profiting. So thanks so much, Ting Wei, and you can share your thoughts in the comments.
Moving overseas, New Zealand says it has won the battle against community transmission of COVID-19, effectively eliminating the virus. This comes as the country saw new cases in single figures for the past several days. New Zealand has since eased restrictions, with some non-essential business, healthcare and education activity resuming tomorrow.
Australia has launched a contact tracing app similar to Singapore's Trace Together to help track close contacts of COVID-19 patients. Australia's app, COVID Safe, uses Bluetooth signals to log when people have been close to one another. The Australian government has also promised to legislate privacy protections around COVID Safe, as it drew criticisms by civil liberties groups as an invasion of privacy.
China reported 3 new confirmed cases yesterday, down from 11 a day earlier, with no new deaths. Of the new cases, two were imported and the one local case was in the northeastern border province of Heilongjiang. Meanwhile, all coronavirus patients in Wuhan have now been discharged from the hospitals.
The city where the coronavirus outbreak began has no remaining cases in its hospitals. That's according to a Chinese health official on Sunday. The coronavirus was believed to have originated in a wet market in Wuhan in December. But on Sunday, China said all virus patients in Wuhan had been discharged and reported 0 new cases in the city. Wuhan and surrounding Hubei province were locked down beginning in January, with roads sealed, trains and planes canceled, and residents trapped indoors for over 2 months. The city had reported nearly 4,000 deaths due to the virus, representing over 80% of China's total. But on April 8th, the lockdown was finally lifted, as the focus of the virus largely shifted away from China and onto other parts of the world. According to a Reuters tally, nearly 3 million people have been infected globally. China is now trying to grapple with preventing the virus, which started within its borders, from making its way back through imported cases from overseas. The northeast Chinese border province of Heilongjiang has seen large numbers of cases entering from Russia.
Meanwhile, schools in Beijing reopened today, but only partially for final year senior high students, as well as teachers and administrators. These students have to sit their entrance exams this year.
To share more on what happened on the ground is the Straits Times China Bureau Chief Tan Dawn Wei. She joins us live from Beijing. Dawn, hi Dawn. Now some students are back at school after 3 months of online lessons at home. From what you observed, how did the day pan out? Tell us about the mood of these returning students as well as the precautions in place.
Yeah, so Beijing today reopened schools for just the final year students of its senior high school. These are students who will be taking the all-important, the make or break college entrance exam, or better known as the Gaokao. Originally, the exam was slated for June, but because of the coronavirus outbreak, the Education Ministry decided to push it back a month to July 7th and 8th. Schools have spent more than a month getting ready to reopen because of very strict regulations by the Beijing municipal government. For instance, all teachers have to be screened for the coronavirus, which they did last week, and all students will have to go, when they go into the school, they would have to be screened by facial recognition technology and show their mobile health code before they are allowed to enter the gates of the school. And in school, classes have also shrunk. Only 25 students are allowed in a classroom, and meal times are staggered, so you don't get all students crowding the canteen at once. So some of them will eat in the canteen, and then they will have to sit apart, and some will eat in the classrooms. And all teachers and students have to wear face masks at all times when they are in school, and have their temperatures checked twice a day. So students we spoke to say that they are excited about finally going back to school after 3 months of doing home-based learning. They say that they miss the physical interaction with their teachers and their friends, and obviously a classroom environment is more conducive for interaction and engagement, and more importantly, help motivate these students, because teachers are physically there to supervise them and to answer their questions.
Of course. So Beijing and Shanghai are among the last of China's cities to allow schools to resume. So Dawn, what's the timeline for a full reopening of schools in these cities?
Yes, Beijing and Shanghai are probably the most cautious of all cities and provinces in China reopening and reopening schools. Practically all provinces have reinstated schools since starting March the 9th. Hubei province is the last of the provinces, and it will let final year senior high school students go back to school on May the 6th. In addition to the final year high school students, Shanghai today also let its final year middle high school students go back to school. And these are students who also have to sit for an entrance exam to get into high school. For Beijing, that will happen only on May the 11th. As for the rest of the students, return dates do vary from province to province. Some, like Chongqing, have already announced that students of all grades can return to school by the end of May. But the idea is really to let students return in batches and not all at once.
Now, Dawn, as we saw just now, all COVID-19 patients in Wuhan have been discharged. That's a milestone. Was it commemorated in any way?
No, not like how they celebrated the lifting of the lockdown on Wuhan on April 8th. So the National Health Commission yesterday announced that there are no more coronavirus patients in Wuhan hospitals. The last patient was a 77-year-old man who was released from hospital at noon yesterday. And the last patient who was severely ill was well enough to go home on Saturday. And this patient was also said to be the last severe case in Hubei province. But it should also be made clear that there are previous COVID-19 patients who are still being treated for other conditions in hospital, conditions that had come about because of the coronavirus. For instance, there are some patients who no longer have the virus, but are still in intensive care for kidney problems and other ailments arising from the coronavirus in at least 3 hospitals in Wuhan. And the patients who have recovered and gone home may also still need further care.
Well, Dawn, the rise of imported cases in China has led to foreigners being the target of discrimination. You wrote about a particular group, the African population in Guangzhou. So what's going on there and how has the government responded?
China saw a rise in anti-foreigner sentiments sometime in March when the tide turned and it was getting an increasing number of imported cases. Even though the Health Commission explained that 90% of these imported cases were returning Chinese nationals who were escaping the outbreak in other countries, I think the news and the images of outbreaks and lockdowns around the world and the soaring number of infections worried the Chinese because they had, after tremendous effort, only just gotten a handle on the domestic situation. And what happened in Wuhan, not in Wuhan, I'm sorry, what happened in Guangzhou was that there was a cluster in the African community there. And very quickly we saw incidents of Africans being evicted from their homes and were sleeping rough because hotels wouldn't take them either. And McDonald's had to apologize after it put out a notice banning Black people from entering one of its eateries. So the African community there were subjected to mass testing and quarantine. And local authorities said that they found more than 100 out of the 4,500 or so Africans that they tested. So more than 100 had tested positive. The discrimination and the abuse were pretty intense. And that has prompted African embassies and the African Union to launch diplomatic protests over the treatment of their citizens. China says that it does not tolerate discrimination and that all foreigners are treated the same when it comes to them enforcing these anti-coronavirus measures. But I do think that the incident has definitely put a dent on bilateral relations between Africa and China. And it will be interesting to see whether this will have any sort of long-term repercussions or impact on their bilateral ties going forward, and whether China will, after the pandemic blows over, tighten visa regulations on these Africans coming into China.
Well, thank you so much, Dawn, for those insights. As always, do stay safe. That was our China Bureau Chief in Beijing, Tan Dawn Wei. Now let's check in with Dylan Ang on what else is happening around the world.
Thanks, Olivia and Haryanto. Let's take a quick look at what's making headlines beyond our borders. Seoul has said that North Korean leader Kim Jong Un is alive and well, downplaying rumors of his health. Questions were raised about Kim's well-being after he missed the celebrations of his grandfather's birthday on April 15. Previous reports had said that Kim had undergone surgery and was in grave danger. Worldwide, global military expenditure in 2019 saw its biggest uptick in a decade, A report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute showed that the world's nations spent a combined $1.9 trillion on their militaries last year. That's up 3.6% from 2018 and the highest since 2010. The top 3 military spenders, no surprises that the US topped the list, but it was followed by 2 Asian countries for the first time. China and India make up the rest of the top 3 spenders. And over in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia ended the death penalty for children. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is seen as the force behind the loosening of restrictions in a bid to modernize the ultra-conservative kingdom. The kingdom has one of the world's highest rates of execution. At least 187 people were executed last year. The public spectacle of whipping a handcuffed prisoner for often non-violent crimes has also been stopped. And that's all from me today. Back to you guys.
As the saying goes, not all heroes wear capes. And this is true for these heroes made at home who were featured in yesterday's Sunday Times.
From holding a film screening online to recapturing the communal experience of cinema to developing a website to give hawker stalls a greater online presence, these 5 groups of heroes have responded to circuit breaker measures in creative ways that make our lives a tad better.
We have one of the heroes joining us today, the lady behind the Get Well card project, Mdm Rahimah Rahim. She started this project because she felt it was important to educate children about the social and economic impact of COVID-19 and hopes participants will be kinder and more grateful towards front-line workers. Madam, if you could start us, how did the idea to have the Get Well card project start? We understand your initial plan was to get children to fold paper cranes, which symbolizes hope in the Japanese culture.
Yeah, that was the initial idea, but sometimes things evolve. So instead what I did was to create stickers of paper crane with the message of hope and healing, and to get them delivered to the schools together with blank cards as well as stickers so that they can create the Get Well card.
Well, Madam Rahimah, the goal of the project is to gather 1,000 cards, and to achieve that goal, you had to reach out to as many schools and students as possible all over Singapore. So tell me about the process. How did you carry out the project?
Well, it's very much like a sales job. You write emails, you try to entice the schools to participate and believe in the goal of the project. Some schools were very open, and I remember Yio Chu Kang Primary School was the first to say like, okay, we'll do it, And then we have Radin Mas and Woodgrove, and we have Madrasah Wat Tanjung, which I wanted to reach out to as many schools, as many diverse schools, including those special schools. So Konesian was the one who, Madam Christina was wonderful. She accepted the participation and she got the students and the teachers involved in the project. So it was very much canvassing the schools. 20 of the schools were reached and 7 schools responded. It was a lot of calling as well and trying to tell them that this is legit and it's not something that I would like to take advantage of the school, the children.
Yeah. And you're close to your goal, about 950 cards now. So what's next after you manage to gather all 1,000 cards? Are there plans to extend this project?
Yeah, some of the cards that I collected were really beautiful. Some were mounted on artboards and so on. So the whole idea is that these cards will go to hospitals, go supermarkets, go to all the frontliners. I hope some of the police stations will accept them and have them on the walls or something. But the card is, we still accept the cards from members of the public. Getwellcard.sg is open. We welcome all submissions. I mean, it's the CV period right now. We have parents who can, encourage their children to get involved.
Well, thank you so much, Mdm Rahimah. Thank you for your time as well. And certainly these messages will definitely go a long way to lift the mood of the frontline workers. That was Mdm Rahimah Rahim, who started the Get Well card project to educate children about the social impact of COVID-19 and dispel notions of racism.
In other news, the first female president of the Singapore Hockey Federation, Annabel Pennefather, died this morning. She was 72 years old. She was the first female vice president of the Singapore National Olympic Council, as well as Singapore's first female chef de mission, serving the 2002 Commonwealth Games and the 2004 Olympic Games. Outside Singapore, Ms. Pennefather also held positions in several international federations, including the International Hockey Federation and World Athletics.
Those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, do log on to straitstimes.com. Now, before we go, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, do tap on the red subscribe button down below. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.